Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is a groundbreaking series that dives into the lives of people living in the last frontier. Each episode introduces you to colorful characters from around the state. Funding for Indie Alaska is provided in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company. Catch the latest episodes at alaskapublic.org.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with your Alaska weather. As always, please visit our website at arh.noaa.gov. You can get updates to our forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we have out for the state. You can also call our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. Taking a look now at our satellite imagery, we'll start off in the west. We have our first system coming up that is moving more easterly here, and we have our frontal system you can see in the higher cloud bands there, pushing into western and central Aleutian Islands, bringing some rain to those areas. Moving off a little bit to the east now over the rest of the band, we have those darker cloud cover, which means that we have a lot of low clouds out there, some stratus hanging out down in the Pribilofs area. As we move out over mainland Alaska, we have a low sitting out in the Gulf that is tracking off towards the southeast, bringing in a lot of cloud cover with a lot of rain going into the panhandle, and you can see the flow behind it, a little bit more of the convective clouds there, which means that there is going to be a potential for some isolated thunderstorms as we get off into the evening hours. And then finally, we'll look over mainland Alaska, some lower clouds throughout much of the state, but we do have some clearing, especially in the south central, and then we have some lower clouds along the Arctic coastline as well. So for our weather for the remainder of today, we have our low out in the Gulf, bringing in that rain again throughout all of the panhandle, extending out into Prince William Sound as well. And it's a little bit lighter out there in Prince William Sound, Cordova area, but still coming in due to that low pressure system. Throughout much of the rest of the south central into mainland interior Alaska, we're not seeing a whole lot of precipitation, but as we get into eastern parts of the Brooks Range and then all along the Arctic coastline, we are seeing some light snow flurries up there mixed in with some patchy fog, and there's also the potential for some light freezing drizzle throughout the remainder of today. Around the Seward Peninsula, not a lot of activity, but as we get out further to the west towards St. Lawrence Island, seeing a mixture of rain and snow out there. Isolated rain showers in the Kuskokwim Delta area, and then along the Alaska Peninsula, seeing some isolated rain showers there as well, primarily on the Bering side as we have that northwest flow coming in. Then the frontal system we saw earlier on satellite, bringing in rain from the western Aleutian Islands towards the Atka area. As we move into tonight, that system pushes off a little bit more to the east, now bringing in rain through the eastern Aleutian Islands. Areas of fog and some lighter precipitation on the backside of that low coming into the western Aleutians and western Bering Sea. And out ahead of that system, some isolated rain showers making it into the Pribilofs, and our continued northwest flow bringing in some rain showers primarily on the Bering side along the Alaska Peninsula. Throughout the YK Delta area, starting to see some fog develop overnight. As we get further to the north, that mixture of flurries and fog, now that freezing drizzle coming all the way down to St. Lawrence Island, up through Shishmaref and Kivalina, all the way along the Arctic coastline and into the Brooks Range, flurries, fog, and potential for light freezing drizzle. That is going to continue down the eastern part of the state through the upper Yukon Valley, down through Eagle, Northway, Delta Junction, and then parts of the Alaska Range as well. Flurries, fog, and the potential for some light freezing drizzle. The remainder of the interior all the way out towards the Seward Peninsula down into the south central, not going to see a lot of rain overnight. Then as we get down into the eastern parts of Prince William Sound near Cordova, going to see some lightning rain out there, and then some pretty strong rain throughout all of the night with the potential for some isolated thunderstorms, especially along the Gulf Coast there throughout all of the night. As we move into Thursday, way early hours, potential for those thunderstorms is going to start to diminish. And then as we continue with that southwesterly flow, going to continue to see rain throughout all day on Thursday in the southeast. New low forming near Prince William Sound, going to bring in some additional rainfall along the eastern parts of Prince William Sound, becoming mixed with snow as we get closer towards Valdez and pushing up into the Copper River Basin. Then along the Alaska Range, flurries, fog, and the potential for light freezing drizzle will continue throughout the day on Thursday up along the eastern part of the state going into the Brooks Range, and the majority of the Arctic coast, with the exception on Thursday of near Barrow, not expecting to see any precipitation up near Barrow on Thursday. As we go down into the Kotzebue Sound area, going to see that fog, flurries, and light freezing drizzle, and that's going to extend down to St. Lawrence Island on Thursday. Seeing areas of fog, especially in the morning in the YK Delta area, and then lightning showers in the Alaska Peninsula as we have our main low system moving through now into the southern part of the Bering, continuing to track east on Thursday. Frontal system now extending past the eastern Aleutian Islands, starting to bring more rain to the western parts of the Alaska Peninsula. Then on the western side of this low, with that northerly flow starting to be a little bit lighter and more just some isolated rain showers coming down from the north. Then on Friday, a new system coming in from the west, bringing more rain to the western Aleutian Islands. A northwesterly flow throughout a lot of the Bering Sea and Aleutians, bringing in some lighter rain showers out there. Our main low dying off, but a new low forming on its old frontal system, starting to bring rain now to Kodiak Island, pulling in more of that warm, moist air from the south. But as we get further into the Bristol Bay area, we are going to start to see more snow there. Up in Dillingham, King Salmon, Iliamna, going to see that mixture of rain and snow. And then in the YK Delta area, rain, snow in the southern part, but as we get closer to the Yukon Delta, just going to be some rain up there. But as we get along the Nome area out towards St. Lawrence Island, that snow and potential for freezing drizzle will continue, and that's going to extend all the way along the Arctic coastline until around the Dead Horse area. Brooks Range should be pretty clear of that on Friday, with the exception of the southeastern portion extending down to the upper Yukon Valley. Mixture of those flurries and light freezing drizzle. And then also along the Alaska Range, we're going to see that freezing drizzle potential continue on Friday. The remainder of the south central, though, is just going to see some light rain and snow showers, becoming more rain as we get further to the south, along the Kenai Peninsula especially, and for Kenai and Homer there on that western side. A little bit more snow as we get further to inland to places like Moose Pass. And as we get out towards Prince William Sound area, southern portions near Cordova, going to see mostly rain, but Valdez going into the Copper River Basin, going to see a mixture of rain and snow there. Then for Yakutat throughout the Panhandle, going to see rain, but it is going to be lighter on the southern portions as we do have some high pressure ridging pushing in from the south. Looking at our temperatures for this afternoon, lower 50s throughout the Panhandle, Skagway and Yakutat. A little bit colder there, 47 degrees this afternoon as of 2 p.m. In the 40s for most locations in the south central, colder in the more interior locations, 37 for Talkeetna, 33 for Glen Allen. In the 50s for Kodiak, with Kodiak City being at 54. Moving up into the interior, in the 30s for most locations. A little bit colder there for Fort Yukon through the park, 28 degrees. And then 25 for Arctic Village. Through Anaktuvuk Pass, 16 degrees this afternoon. And along the Arctic coastline in the 20s out east, with Kaktovik at 26. And then in the teens as we get further off to the west, Cape Lisburne at 23 degrees. Down the entire western coast, we do have temperatures in the 30s until we get down by Macquarie there, 41 degrees this afternoon. We have Kipnik there at 38, with Bethel 35, Aniak 32, and then in the 40s all throughout the Bristol Bay area. And then dropping down a little bit lower as we get into the Alaska Peninsula. On Alaska, 45 degrees, 42 for St. Paul and St. George this afternoon. And in the mid-40s as we get out towards Shemya, 47 way out there. Now, we did have some issues with our network last night, so we do not have our normal high and low temperature maps, but we did able to get our backup ones. The scale is here on the left, and bear with us as we go through these charts. A little bit harder to read here with some of the smaller text, but we'll start off in the Panhandle area. Minimum temperatures for tonight expected to get down into the mid-40s. Ketchikan 45, Sitka and Juneau both at 44. As we move into the south central, temperatures dropping down into the 30s, but staying above freezing for the most part. Anchorage and Homer both going to get down to 33 degrees tonight. Kodiak only going to drop down to around 40. As we move up into the interior portion of the state, dropping down into the teens. Fairbanks down to 19. Bettles down to 17. Western portions of the interior, Ambler and Galena both getting down to 22 degrees for tonight. Coldest, we have Arctic Village getting down to 10 degrees, and then in the teens along the Arctic coastline with Barrow getting down to 15 degrees tonight. Kotzebue Sound area into the 20s, with Kotzebue itself getting down to 20 degrees. Mid-20s down much of the western coast. Getting into those blue shades again, that means that we're going to get a little bit closer to 30. Bethel at 28 degrees for a low tonight. King Salmon above freezing, 35 degrees there. And then right around 40 for the majority of the Aleutian Islands. Cold Bay getting a little bit colder, 38 degrees. And St. Paul dropping down to 36. For our highs tomorrow, temperature scale has changed somewhat a little. So watch out for that as we start to look at this map. And then the Aleutian Islands into the upper 40s, Atka and Unalaska, both getting up to 48 degrees for tomorrow. Into the mid 40s for the Bristol Bay area, 44 for King Salmon. And the upper 30s in the YK Delta area, Bethel at 38. Nome up to 35 and up around 30 as we get to the Kotzebue Sound area. Point Hope getting up to 28 degrees. Up to right around 20 as we get along the Arctic coastline. Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse around 24 degrees for a high tomorrow. Mid to upper 20s for much of the interior, a little bit warmer as we get closer to Galena and McGrath in the 30s there. South Central up around 40 degrees. Valdez a little bit colder, 37 for a high tomorrow. And then down in the Panhandle, mid to upper 40s with Sitka and Yakutat, both getting up to 48 degrees for tomorrow. Taking a look now at our aviation weather, with our low bringing in all that southwesterly flow to the Panhandle area, expecting to see widespread MVFR conditions with some areas of IFR in there, especially up near the passes. As we move out over the western portion of the state, out in the Bering Sea, MVFR conditions expected with some areas of IFR as that front pushes through. Along the western coast, MVFR conditions as well. And the Arctic coastline, going to see MVFR conditions with some lower ceilings up there and some isolated areas of MVFR throughout many of the valleys out over mainland Alaska down into the south central. Looking at our passes now, AKwx Pass should be VFR, as well as Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill both expected to be visual flight rules. Rainy Pass should be VFR, as well as Windy and Isabel, all going to be VFR for tomorrow. Mentasta Pass VFR, Tanita Pass VFR, Portage VFR, but Chilkoot and White seeing those southwesterly flow, bringing in some rain and lower clouds there. IFR conditions expected for tomorrow. For our freezing levels, the main surface freezing level has dropped down to the southern part of mainland Alaska, but with that low out over the Gulf, bringing in some of that warmer air to areas around the Panhandle and pushing towards the Kenai Peninsula as well. As we get further off to the west, lows pushing through the Bering Sea are bringing up a lot of that warmer air from the south, keeping that freezing line way further to the north, pushing out through the Bering Strait. Taking a look at our icing for tomorrow, quite a bit of activity going on, a lot of different levels here as we're getting into the winter season. Way out west, we have between 6,000 and 8,000 feet, some more moderate areas out there. Below 10,000 feet, that is expected to move a little as that front pushes through. Then we have some lighter areas of icing between 8,000 and 10,000 feet there along the southwest coastline. Up near Kotzebue, we do have between 6,000 and 9,000 feet there, a little bit more moderate, and some really low stuff along the Arctic coastline between 2,000 and 4,000 feet. And that area is going to extend but get up a little bit higher there to between 8,000 and 10,000 over the eastern part of the state, and then down over the southeastern part of the state above 10,000 feet there. Our jet, we're going to start off looking at the main core of the jet, which is south of the Aleutian Islands out of a westerly direction, getting as high as 140 knots, but it's quite a wide area, so even just to the south of the Aleutian Islands, we will have some speeds up to 70 to 80 knots there, but the main core is well to the south, dropping down to 90 as we get further off to the east. Mainland Alaska, not seeing any jet streaks moving through, but a little bit off to the north, a northwesterly component, 80 knots there, getting up to as high as 95, pushing out over northern Canada. Dropping down to 9,000 feet, low over the main part of the state. Pretty weak flow, only around 5 to 10 knots around that low. As you get further to the north, 15 and eventually 30 knots just off the Arctic coastline. Down over the Gulf, 15 knots just in the northern parts of the Gulf, getting up to 20 knots, but picking up over the southeast side of that westerly direction, 30 to 35 knots out there. Out over the western part of the state, we do have some pretty weaker flow extending out through much of the Bering Sea, but as we get down by the Aleutian Islands, westerly flow there, 25 to 35 knots, getting even stronger as we push further to the south. Taking us down to 3,000 feet, we have between our low and high out over the Bering Sea, stronger wind just between those, 20 to 25 knots out of an easterly direction. Otherwise, the Bering is going to see some lower winds, only around 5 to 15 knots. For the Aleutian Islands, westerly flow 25 to 30 knots, getting higher once again as we drop further to the south, and that westerly flow continues out through the Gulf, 20 to 25 knots, extending out over the southeast. Much of mainland Alaska is still pretty weak. Easterly flow on the northern side of the low as we get closer to the Brooks Range, out of an easterly direction, 25 knots there, and that's going to continue up along the Arctic coastline. So we look at our turbulence for tomorrow, down in the southeast with that flow coming in off the water, we do have some moderate turbulence below 5,000 feet out there. Up along the Arctic coastline, some lighter turbulence with that easterly flow below 4,000 feet expected. And then throughout all the Aleutian Islands, extending in to the Alaska Peninsula as well, below 4,000 feet as that low and frontal system track through the islands. And if you stay with us, we'll be back shortly with the marine forecast.
Good evening. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of Alaska Public Media and the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, welcome to Hangar Flying. Our guest this evening is Bill Compton. Bill's been on the program before. He's a CFI and ATP, and I've got to tell you, I've found him to be one of the most knowledgeable people on fuel management and long-distance flights in GA aircraft. Bill admits to watching too many fly-in movies as a kid, which resulted in a lifelong fascination with airplanes. Bill had his private by 16 and he was CFI by 19. He's owned a lot of great airplanes, including a Cessna 180, Bonanzas, Barons, and currently a turbocharged Bonanza. Bill, welcome to Hangar Flying.
Well, thank you, Harry.
Nice to have you back on. I mentioned that, in my opinion, you're one of the most knowledgeable people I've met on flight planning, precise flight planning, and fuel management. Let's begin by you telling the audience about your long-distance over water experience. What kind of flights have you done?
Well, back in the early 70s, I had a Bonanza with tip tanks, and it was a good long-range aircraft. I did non-stops down to Seattle area. Then I saw an ad for a cabin tank that would fit in a Bonanza, 110 gallons. And I thought, oh, if I had that, I could go to Hawaii. And so I picked it up, and I've had it ever since, and that's enabled my flights. And I learned AstroNav and navigated with that. And by that time, I had an ATP, and I was so impressed with that. I thought, I must know everything about this, and I just went. And I learned how little I really did know. And gradually, over many oceanics, I've gradually figured out the things that I'm here to talk about.
So, AstroNav, so that was before GPS then, huh?
Oh yeah, 75, yes.
Wow.
That's my first oceanic.
I'll bet GPS does come in handy now, though, huh?
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about, how you flight plan.
Well, for a long-range trip, I have all the numbers planned out for the aircraft I fly. If I'm taking off at 3,800 pounds, I know that I'm going to climb to my cruise altitude and set power for the indicated airspeed that I want to fly for the first 33 gallons of fuel. And when my totalizer shows that I'm down 33 gallons, which is 200 pounds, then I decrease my airspeed by about 3 knots. And throughout the flight, as the fuel burns off and the airplane gets lighter, I gradually slow down. As I slow down, I get more and more air miles per gallon. And air miles per gallon is really what it's all about. And I realize, and what what's been known for a long time, that your nautical air miles per gallon is dependent on the indicated airspeed that you fly, your weight, aircraft weight, and your center of gravity location.
So let me interrupt you. With your airplane, 3,800 pounds, you take off, climb to altitude. What would be your typical airspeed you start out with?
Oh, indicated airspeed might be 140, and gradually down to about 125 by the end of the trip.
What about trade-offs? What are some of your considerations? I mean, there may be a situation where flying slower would give you better range, but it's impractical. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Absolute maximum range is gotten at the point where your angle of attack of the airplane flying through the air is such the drag of the lift that you're using is equal to the drag of what's called parasite drag, the friction against the airframe. And that'll give the best miles per gallon. However, it's far from perfect because the airplane's too slow. The fuel flow for that regimen in my airplane anyway is way below the fuel flow that the engine would be happy with. So what I do is take LD max and the airspeed for that, and I increase it by 16%, knowing that my miles per gallon penalty will be 4%. And then I maintain that balance between the two factors, and that allows me to maintain a constant angle of attack for the whole flight.
Bill, we've run out of time. What I'd like to do is get you back next time, and probably a couple of times, and let's start out that session with explaining a little bit about L over D max, which maybe some of our pilots out there haven't talked about since they were getting their license. But let's do that. Thanks for being on the program tonight, and folks, hope you enjoyed the program. Look forward to seeing Bill next time and continuing the discussion.
Welcome back. We'll take a quick look at the ice edge. You can see our pack ice extending out through much of the Arctic Ocean along the Arctic coastline, and we do have it filled in now. No true areas of open ice north of the Arctic coastline from Barrow to the east. And over the next 5 days, we are expecting the pack ice to fill in for much of this area. Still a little bit area of the lighter coverage north of Kaktovik, but for the most part, that pack ice is going to continue to grow and fill in on those areas. Shorefest ice continuing down the northwest part of the state closer towards Cape Lisburne, and we do have continued growth of new ice down by Kotzebue. And for our main marine forecast, starting off in the southeast, we have southwesterly flow 20 to 25 knots out in the Gulf with seas anywhere from 12 to 14 feet, highest as we get further to the south. Inside waters, southeasterly flow 20 to 25 knots with seas highest further to the south around 8 feet there. Then on Friday, flow becoming a lot lighter, 10 to 15 knots everywhere. Seas in the inside waters 2 to 3 feet and dropping down to 7 to 9 feet out over the Gulf. For the south central, we have primarily a westerly flow, strongest out as we get into the Gulf, around 25 knots there. The inside waters here, Cook Inlet only around 10 knots, but down towards Shelikof Strait, we do have southwesterly flow 20 knots there. And in Prince William Sound, northeasterly flow around 10 knots, with seas 7 to 8 feet out in the Gulf. As we look into Friday, flow becoming more easterly now, 15 to 25 knots out over the Gulf, highest as we get closer to Kodiak Island. Strongest winds throughout the area are going to be west of the Barren Islands, around 30 knots there out of an easterly direction, and northeast flow in Cook Inlet now 15 to 20 knots. Out over the Alaska Peninsula on Thursday, quite a variation of flow, but all around 20 to 25 knots. East or westerly flow as we get off further to the east, then becoming more southerly as we get closer to the west there, around 25 knots out of that southerly direction. Seas on the Pacific side 7 to 8 feet, 4 feet on the Bering side. Then on Friday, southerly flow for the most part, 20 to 25 knots, till we get into Bristol Bay, easterly flow there around 30 knots. For the Aleutian Islands, somewhat of a westerly flow, weakest out there by the Dutch Harbor area, 25 knots, getting up to as high as 35 knots as we get further off to the west. And then as we move out into Friday, all more due westerly flow now, getting as high as 40 knots on the Pacific side, down around 30 to 25 knots as we get further off towards the West Shimia area, southwesterly flow, 30 knots there. Seas as high as 19 feet on the Pacific side, as high as 12 feet on the Bering side. Along the west coast of the state, pretty weak flow for the majority of the areas, 10 to 15 knots out of a somewhat northeasterly direction. Higher as we get closer to the Pribilof Islands out of an easterly direction, 25 knots there on Thursday. Then on Friday, flow continuing to be somewhat northeasterly, picking up a little bit though as we get south of Nunavik Island. Easterly flow there, 25 knots, continuing to be easterly, or 25 knots there by the Pribilofs out of northeasterly direction. Then along the Arctic coastline, all easterly flow, primarily around 30 knots with heavy freezing spray all the way along the Arctic coastline. A little bit lighter as we get down into the Kotzebue Sound area, 15 knots out of an easterly direction there. And then on Friday, 20 to 25 knots, again, freezing spray everywhere, heavy freezing spray from Point Hope all the way along the Arctic coastline, getting as high as 35 knots out of the Beaufort Sea. Quick recap for weather out for the state. In the evening and overnight hours in the Panhandle, there is a potential for some isolated thunderstorms along the Gulf Coast. As we get a little bit further to the east, just going to see some heavier rain, and that's going to extend through all the Panhandle through Yakutat with some lighter rain out by Cordova. South Central, not going to see a lot outside of that, but flurries with fog and the potential for light freezing rain through the Alaska Range, up the eastern part of the state, Brooks Range and Arctic Coast, through Shishmaref, and then down towards St. Lawrence Island. The remainder of the interior should be pretty clear of precipitation. Fog for the YK Delta forming overnight with some showers along the Bering side of the Alaska Peninsula, and then our low with frontal system pushing through the Aleutian Islands, bringing rain out there. For Thursday, going to be pretty similar with that rain coming in throughout much of the Aleutian Islands and Bering Sea. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us tonight.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.